Hello, this is the last lecture on the Democratic Republic of the Congo and focuses on the Kuba peoples. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. The Kuba are primarily an agricultural people and migrated into the DRC in the 1300s. By the 16th century, the smaller communities had formed a kingdom with Bouchon as the oldest chiefdom. So similar to the Yoruba people, you have chiefs who rule their little areas with a king who's over all the chiefs. And the king must come from the capital, Nisheng, and this is also where the Bouchon is based. So in the 1600s, all of these chiefdoms were unified into a kingdom that peaked between 1630 to 1680 by Cheyenne the Great. In the 19th to 20th century, this central authority was weakened by civil wars and colonization. So in 1750, the Kuba kingdom reaches its biggest size, roughly the size of Belgium, although the peak of Kuba is 1870 to 1890, based on the ivory trade with Angola. And the wealth of the Kuba kingdom is from exports of ivory, raffia, and other arts. Many of the arts are royal, as the kings commission and design their own works specific to their reign. So the creation myth is that the king is linked to the creator god and the mythical first ancestor named Woot. Woot had sex with his sister Muil, and this is what created humans, but it also brought about death, evil, and disease. And after having sex with Muil, Woot is ashamed and flees, and he takes with him the basket of vital knowledge. And this basket contained knowledge and emblems that are necessary in order to rule. So any object that is red is passed down the royal line and comes from Woot. Anything that is blue, each king commissions, and that object is buried with the king. So Woot is fleeing after having sex with his sister, and he drops a basket in the wilderness, where it's found by a pygmy named Toi Tshwa. And Toi gives it to a Bouchon man, which therefore gives the Bouchon peoples the right to rule. In terms of art, you have what's called pim, and this is the royal prerogative. And so each new king commissions new treasures, a new costume, which is called buanchi, and you can see that the king is wearing it here, as well as commissioning new architecture, new figural emblems, masks, cloth patterns, etc., all of which are stored in the treasury. This art is very important for the court because it bestows prestige and authority, but also is a sign of wealth because art is labor intensive and requires specialists. Art is also made in order to export to the Chokwe neighbors. So, focusing specifically on this object, what you see here is the king wearing his royal masquerade his royal outfit. And so it's covered in cowrie shells, and cowrie shells have traditionally been used as a form of currency in Africa. This is a very, very heavy object. It would be extremely heavy. Hang on just one moment. I have the weight in my notes here, so give me just a second. Sorry. But think about all that goes into this, right? So you have all these various fabrics. You have a lot of beads, right? You can see the beads here in the white. You have all these cowrie shells. It is an extremely prestigious as well as very heavy object. Sorry, I'm looking here. Give me just one sec. Let's see. So you also have animal skins, etc., as well as all of these feathers. And so this is a costume that is commissioned specifically for the king and would be buried with that king. Artists are both male and female, and they are professionals. So the professionals are the only ones who make royal art, but lay people are able to make the popular arts. Men fulfill the roles of sculptors, weavers, smiths, and tailors, while women are potters, sculptors of wood paste, embroiderers, and practice scarification. And many kings are also artists. And the artist's reputation is based on the success, wealth, and status of the patron. So the patron commissions gifts that are made for export, and they're given as part of political exchanges and relationships. And they often feature geometric patterns, surface detail, design, etc. And there's a lot of diversity within the arts that are made because the artists have a lot of diversity amongst themselves. And there's local autonomy and social competition. And these artists maintain basic standards, but they also have room for innovation. And so line and pattern are emphasized over volume, even in sculpture and architecture. And in the 1920s, the king establishes an art museum in the palace. Okay, so the first object that I want to talk about is an ndap. And the ndap figure is stylized, and each one represents a specific ruler. You can tell which king you are looking at based on the object in front of them. And this object is called an eyeball. That's the name for the objects in general. This specifically is a mancala board. So these are commemorative figures of the king, and they're symbolic portraits. The earliest is from the 1700s when it was introduced by a king, and then each subsequent king would oversee the creation of his own ndap. And then later on, they made figures to personify the earlier kings so that then each king from the start of the kingdom would have their own ndap. So these are made during the king's life, as I just mentioned, and it allows the king's spirit to rub off on this figure. And then after the king's death, this figure becomes the dwelling place of the deceased king. So as the king is dying, this object is placed next to him in order to capture his spirit. And then the next king sleeps with it beside his bed for a brief while in the beginning in order to allow the prior king's spirit to enter him. So what we see here is the king Xian. And in front of him, you have the mancala board or lele. This is shiny. It's made from one piece of wood. And the reason it's shiny is because it's regularly oiled with palm oil and camwood. So once again, we return to the African proportions where the head is 1/4 to 1/3 of the overall size of the body. These are very symmetrical. This figure's arms are tightly at his side. The body is tense while the face is meditative and serene. And this here is actually not scarification, it's a cowrie belt. So the cowrie shells, again, related with currency, and this cowrie shell belt specifically is related to kingship, as is the hat that is worn, which is called a shadi. And so the eyeball, this mancala board in front of the king, represents cunning, intellect, and judging disputes in the kingdom, because in order to win mancala, you must be good at strategy and also wise. So this figure fulfills other protective roles, such as being placed by a wife during childbirth, and again, as I mentioned before, being placed next to the successor's bed in order to allow that spirit to kind of enter into the new king as well. Okay, so apologies for not being able to find the information before about, about this object. So this is called the buanchi. This is the royal costume. And I said that it's very heavy. It weighs up to 185 pounds. Okay, so think about having to carry that on you. And it's not just, you know, in your trunk, which is the strongest area. It's everywhere. Everything is covered in these shells. And it serves to aggrandize or enlarge the size of the king, emphasizing his power and his strength. This is the ceremonial dress of the king, and it includes eagle feathers, leopard skin, cowrie shells, beads, medals, as well as the traditional cloth, which we'll talk about in just a couple minutes. So the king is not allowed to touch the ground. So you can see that there is this carpet. And on top of the carpet, there is a sort of a stage on which the king sits. And this object would be commissioned by the king and then buried with him, and the successor would create a new costume at the beginning of his reign. And you can see here there are drums next to the king, and here is the basket with the knowledge of the king. And you can see that this is blue, which means that it's commissioned by that king and would be buried with that king. So let me get my information back. Sorry about that. The next aspect of the Kuba kingdom that I want to talk to you about is the masquerade. And this masquerade is performed by royalty and performed for royalty. And this is based on the creation myth. So you have the Woot or Mwash Amboy. So you can see here that there are a lot of different spellings, but this is essentially Woot. And the costume is similar in appearance to the Boishanti, so the king's costume, right? So look at all of the cowrie shells, the general aggrandizement of the body, the beads to emphasize the face. And this mask and its accompanying costume would be kept in the king's palace. And it serves to represent the king as historically the king performs this role. The costume is an element of the treasury, and it's also personal property, so likely buried with the king. It's associated with the Bouchon kingdom, so that is the most important chiefdom where the king must come from. It's also worn during important funerals, and it includes eagle feathers, cowrie shells, leopard claws, etc. But the base is Kuba cloth. And the headdress patterning oftentimes will reference bark cloth, but this is a helmet mask, and it's not possible to see out of it as there are no eye holes. So this means that the king or whomever is performing this has to move slowly and regally, and they're accompanied by an assistant. And this has to do with the fact that they can't see, right? They have to move carefully. There's usually monkey fur for the beard and an embroidered strip over the nose and mouth. And so that is, let me zoom in here. So this strip right down the center of the face, and this indicates that this figure is from the spirit world because it does not need food or air, and only a spirit would not need those things. So the various colors have specific meanings. So red indicates growth, abundance, fertility, but also suffering. White is related to death, the ancestors' mourning, and spiritual purity. And blue indicates a high rank and the contributions of individual leaders. This is made from wood and then embroidered and decorated, and fibers used to build it out. So this is a mukenga. It's a royal elephant mask, and it appears at funerals and royal ceremonies and represents water or forest spirits. So this is Woot, the god who had sex with his sister and is therefore the father of mankind or humans. And so you can see here, this from the side, and this is like an elephant's trunk. So kings are akin to elephants. Next, we have Ngati Mwash or Mwil. So this is the sister of Woot with whom he had sex, and she's the mother of humans. And this is made of wood with fiber as decoration. So here you see lines, and we saw similar lines when we were looking at the Nyambo, and this indicates tears and the hardship of women's existence. And when she dances with her brother, Mwash and Boy, she assumes a rather maternal role. She also dances with Bloom, and in that role, she assumes the position of the seductress. Bloom is, he finds the basket with the knowledge, so he's the pygmy. And this is worn with a raffia costume, and it's performed by men, but because this is a female figure that's being portrayed, there are wooden breasts, etc. So diamonds are visible on the face, and this is a symbol of royalty. Blue is the color of leadership, while white is the color of mourning and spiritual purity. Here's another example. Again, like her brother, she has the strip down her mouth and nose, indicating she needs neither air nor food. And her dance is somewhat more vigorous. You can see that she has eye holes, so she is not blind in the way that, her brother is. So you can see the full costume here. So there's more fur. There is this Kuba cloth, cowrie shells, beads, etc. And finally, we have Bloom, or Toi, the pygmy who found the basket. He's a hunter-gatherer who lives in the wilderness and is undomesticated. And these masks would be passed down through generations. So the origin of this mask is that the carver saw a spirit with a face like Bloom and created the mask. And this imitates a Toi person, so a hunter-gatherer in the region. And this masquerade overall allows for gender discussions related to sexual relations, depictions of females, etc. And so the overlay of metals, etc., indicates that this is a status object. So this is a status symbol. So you'll often have beaded strips over the eyes or the nose and the mouth, again, indicating that this is a spirit who does not need the human senses. This is a different depiction. And here you can see someone dressed as Bloom for a masquerade. And so he will fight with Wash Boy or Woot for the affections of Woot's sister, Ngadiam Wash or Muil. And the reason for this, the physical aspects of this mask, particularly with the bulbous head, is that this is the perception of people in the area who are what is called pygmy peoples. And so this masquerade has over 20 characters, but these are the three main figures, and these three act out the royal origin of the Kuba people. And they perform for initiation ceremonies, funerals, and royal ceremonies. Okay, so a few different images. You can see at the DIA that they have a full set, if you will, of these three masks, and they are in the room with the other masks. Lastly, I want to talk about some textiles. And so these are bark cloth. So you're going to see bark cloth as well as raffia and cut pile cloth. So these types of cloth are very famously associated with the Kuba people. So bark cloth is the lowest in the hierarchy. And this is considered the cloth of the ancestors. And one study has suggested that 2/3 of all possible variations of design using just lines are found within these Kuba cloths. So there's a lot of variety in terms of the design and the way that these look. Bark cloth used to be clothing and is used for commoner burials, but for royal burials is replaced by raffia cloth. And this is made by pounding the inner bark of a tree, and then that pounded bark is sewn together and dyed using stamps. Next in the hierarchy, so you have bark cloth is the lowest, then you have raffia. And raffia cloth is woven by men and pieced together, but then sewn and embroidered by women. So similar to Bogolan Fini, which is the mud cloth of the Bamana people, it has a rhythm, but there are asymmetrical elements. So basically the way that this is made, and it's been woven for centuries in Central Africa. So men grow palm trees and then they collect and weave fiber from the outer frond of a palm on a horizontal loom, so 2-inch strips. And men and women decorate with embroidery and applique. And women create skirts that are between 6 and 9 feet long, and men's wrappers are over 9 feet. So many artists will work on the same piece. So if you're looking at 2-inch strips, this is a lot of work. And it's also a lot of work just to get the textiles in order to make this cloth. So you can see where this is something that would be very desirable. So here you see a woman depicted between 1920 and 1940. So a couple of interesting things that I want to point out here. She's wearing a bark cloth, which you can see here, as well as a raffia cloth underneath, which is what has the ruffle. And you can see that she has a lot of scarification on her stomach in some really beautiful patterns. This little fellow always cracks me up, but she's depicted with her children. Sorry, his little face gets me every time. Okay, so raffia cloth has been part of clothing since the 1500s, and it's worn during ceremonies, as part of costumes, during masquerades, during initiations, etc. It can also be used as currency when cut into squares. And was imported to the neighbors as a form of tourist art. It used to be used to pay tribute to the king at the end of each dry season, and each adult male had to provide the king with one raffia cloth. So the use of this cloth as a currency predates the use of cowrie shells, which is one reason why you see both the raffia cloth and cowrie shells in the king's costume, the buanchi. This type of cloth is also placed in graves, so ancestors both recognize and accept the persons, and is seen as a preservation of an ethnic identity. The last type of cloth, the most prestigious, is cut pile embroidery. And so this features many pieces sewn into one object. And the more dense this is, the better quality. So it looks a lot like velvet. And the way that this is made is that raffia fiber is stitched with needle under a warp or a weft of the base cloth. So you have cloth, which I'm attempting to knit my fingers. It's not going so well, right? So pretend that, right, these are the threads, and so this is what makes the cloth. And the raffia fiber would be stitched in between my fingers, right? So not over and not under, but in between the fingers so that it goes through. And then the fiber sticks up and it's trimmed close to the surface with a small knife to create this very soft, velvety appearance. So just because I'm not entirely positive if everyone knows what velvet is, let me bring up a quick image. I unfortunately don't think I own any velvet cloth, but hopefully, right, so kind of looking at this should bring up some tactile feelings of what velvet looks like. So you can see how it kind of a detail of that on Wikipedia. So coming back to this cloth, the fibers are not knotted because the cloth, the base cloth, is woven tightly enough. It holds the raffia fibers in place. So you can imagine how this takes a lot of work in order to create all of this, this pile, right, this depth. More than 200 patterns have been recorded in cut pile embroidery. And this is primarily made by women and it utilizes contrasts of dark and light. And the creation of this type of cloth is credited to Xi'an the Great, and there are many very distinct patterns. The name of the textile will refer to the king or artist who created the design, and the name of the cloth itself will come from that owner or artist. Royal corpses are wrapped in lengths of this cloth. The cloth is also worn during court ceremonies, etc. And the quality of the cloth is determined by the size, the density, the amount of fine details, how successful the artist is, and the juxtaposition of patterns. So you can see here that this is incredibly varied. This is called a prestige panel. So you can see how this is an object, a social symbol, status symbol, apologies. And this sort of Kuba cloth is quite popular in the West, and you'll often see it kind of hanging like a tapestry in various television shows, etc. So you can see that there's a lot of variety, and these images are not high quality enough to show you the texture, unfortunately, but you can kind of see that it's not smooth, right? There's a lot of texture going on there. Okay, and here is a woman embroidering cloth. So that is roughly what I wanted to show you, and hopefully it has given you an idea of the range of art produced by the Kuba peoples. So until next time.